All right, good morning. We're starting to filter in. I'd start singing, but I'm afraid to have the opposite effect. All right, good to see everybody this morning. Let's go ahead and get started if we can. We're going to continue on with our making our way through the books of Samuel. We got a lot of ground to cover. Again, we're taking this in large sections because I think they kind of, many of them will tell one big narrative, and so that's kind of what we're going to do this morning. And we're going to try to move from starting in chapter 21 all the way through 24, because it's kind of one big unit. But there's several things to look at as we make our way through. So we may not make it all the way, but we're gonna give it the old college try. Where we left at the end of last week is David on the run. Saul has made his intentions known. Jonathan has told David of what Saul plans, and that is to kill him. And so David has left, and that's where we're going to pick up and look at the first 9 verses of chapter 21. David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech came to meet David trembling and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" And David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has charged me with a matter and said to me, 'Let no one know anything of the matter about which I send you and with which I have charged you. I have made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever is here." And the priest answered David, "I have no common bread on hand, but there's the holy bread, if the young men have kept themselves from women." And David answered the priest, "Truly, women have been kept from us, as always when I go on an expedition. The vessels of the young men are holy, even when it is an ordinary journey. How much more today will their vessels be holy?" So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread, but there was bread, but the bread of presence, which is removed before the Lord to be replaced by hot bread on the day it's taken away. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord. His name was Doeg the Edomite, the chief of Saul's herdsmen. And David said to Ahimelech, "Then have you not here a spear or a sword at hand? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste." And the priest said, "The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you struck down in the valley of Elah, behold, it's here, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you'll take that, take it, for there's none but that here." And David said, "There's none like that, give it to me." Okay, David is on the run, and the first thing that I think we need to look at is the problem with the situation in which David finds himself. And we have to wrestle a little bit, okay, with David's lie. That's what it is. I mean, David lies to the priest. It sounds odd. Sounds odd being the anointed, though not yet enthroned king. It seems odd to be the one that God has looked at and said, "This is the one I want, a man after my own heart," and we see this. Now, there's lots of things to look at here, and there's lots of things to think about. So if we just start it this way, David has needs, okay? There's a definite needs that he has. He needs food, and he needs some sort of arms, and he has neither. Okay, so his options are to tell Ahimelech the whole story. Okay, and we could go back. He could go all the way back to, Samuel, the prophet, showed up and anointed me as king, yet Saul still sits on the throne. He can talk, and Ahimelech knows David's history, some of it with Goliath, because he's mentioned it. And then Saul has brought me into his service, but Saul is trying to kill me, and I am trying to escape. The question that Ahimelech asked first is going, why are you here by yourself? Indicates that this is not normal. Okay? So he could tell him the entire truth. Or he could do what he did here, and he could make something up. This is what, philosophy people or ethics teachers talk about with an ethical dilemma. Right? You ever heard of the ethical dilemmas? I mean, there's all kinds of them. One of the most famous being the trolley car. Right? There's a trolley car out of control. It's headed to it looks like a crowd of about 10 people that are standing on tracks and have no idea that it's coming. It's going to kill all of them if you do nothing. But you're by a switch, and if you pull the switch, you can divert the train and it'll kill 5 people. So which one do you do? Right? And the trouble with those ethical dilemmas is there's never a happy ending. Right? There's just no good way of dealing with it. Right? And David finds himself here. So here's what I'm going to do. Okay? I'm going to give David the benefit of the doubt. You don't have to agree with me, that's okay. But here's my thought. We have no idea what's going through the mind of David when this is said. All right? It could be that he worries that that word gets back, right? That Saul will know where he is. And so that's maybe one reason why he doesn't tell the priest what's happening. Okay? And that the priest may side with the king. He doesn't know. But it could be this. It could be that if he tells Ahimelech the whole story, and Ahimelech gives him the food and the armor, that if the king does find out that he's been there, that now Ahimelech is in danger. Okay? For supporting the enemy of the king. That make sense or not? Okay? So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say what he's trying to do is to help the priest. He's trying to give the priest what all of us want, right? Plausible deniability, right? To go, didn't know. And as we read on, it would have worked, except for one problem. We'll talk about that when we get there. Okay, which leads me to this. Another thing I hope that we hear in this little narrative here, and as we look at David and go, okay, he lied. There's no getting around that. Is that maybe the story is not so much about how we ought to act like David, but what we ought to think about how God operates for a little bit. Okay? Because David's not the first one to do this. Not even close. Probably his most famous ancestor, Abraham. When God calls Abraham and brings him to Canaan and the famine hits and Abraham and Sarah go to Egypt, Abraham says, you tell them you're my sister. And if I'm right, and I may be wrong, but if we're ascribing good motives to David's lie to the priest, we really can't find many good motives in Abraham's lie to the Pharaoh, other than to save himself. Yet God takes care of him. I don't think that there's a one of us that reads this passage. I don't think there's a one of us that sits in here today that goes, it's good to lie. Is there? Okay. We also understand that we do while lying may not be it, there are failings that we have. Would you agree with that? Okay. And it seems to me that what we see from God in instances like Abraham and in instances here like with David, that God can still work in spite of our failings as we continue to pursue Him. Okay? It seems ironic, or it may seem, as we try to sit down and examine all this, go, this doesn't seem right. Okay? That we have the sins of Saul that we've seen, to this point, the disobedience of the king, and God rejects him. But this happens with David, and this won't be the only one, by the way. This is the start, right? But it has this with David, and God continues to work with him. I think the difference is in the two people. That is, David is described in Scripture in several places as a man after God's own heart. Doesn't necessarily mean that he's patterned exactly like God. I think what it means is that he is chasing after the purpose of God. And in chasing after the purpose of God, God can work in spite of us. Okay? Doesn't mean that he likes it, and it doesn't mean that we need to go, okay, well, how can we be dishonest today, right? But it's how are we moving this forward? God does not lie. God does not like lying. But in this particular situation, we see what David's options are. And so I'm prepared to give David the benefit of the doubt, okay? And you may not be. But this, I don't want to go too far down a rabbit trail here, but I think that's kind of a good practice. If somebody says something to us, and it can be taken one of two ways. I think we would be a lot further ahead if we would give the benefit of the doubt. Okay? I want to set David's ethical dilemma aside for a minute, but just our response to that. Right? If we look at this and we go, okay, David's just flat wrong here, this is wrong, and we could start condemning and going down that road, which very well could be. Or could we look at this as David trying to do something for the people of God, or even the priest of God in this situation, and give and look more favorably? Okay, those two options. Now, we take those two options and we think about this just in life in general. Life in general as in, there are a lot of things that come out of my mouth, okay, that don't necessarily need to. Is there anybody else in that boat? Okay? All right. And I'm not talking about just type of language. I'm just talking about things that originate here in my brain that just come flying right out, right? And there's no breakage there, right? Sometimes. There should be, but there's not. And so I will say things that, that thing we've talked about before, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I'll say things, and then later I will have somebody go, they could have took that the wrong way. Right? And I'm sure nobody else in here has that problem, but I do. Okay? I'm willing to admit that, and you've sat here long enough to know it. Okay? So, but if someone does that to us, and they say something that we can either take as offensive, or that we can take as, I'm sure they didn't mean it that way, I think that we would be much better off if we would continually lean towards that, I'm sure they didn't mean it that way, until proven otherwise. Okay? Is that fair? Okay, I know that kind of got out of what we're looking at here, but I'm just thinking in our response to David for a second. It's easy, and it seems to be even easier to be offended. Right? And maybe we wouldn't. Maybe we could save ourselves a little of the angst of that, with this idea of maybe it wasn't meant to tear me down, right? Or maybe it wasn't meant to be harmful. Because what typically happens, man, I'm sorry, I'm wasting time. But anyway, what typically happens in that is that we spend time dwelling on it after somebody has said something and they've forgotten it because they didn't mean it that way. And so we're over here wrestling with this, and then, every time we see them, it comes back up of going, well, that's what they said to me. And they have no idea they did. Huh? So if we could just let that stuff go, I think we'd be much happier. Okay, here we go. Let's keep moving. Sorry, didn't mean to take up too much time there. All right. So David rose and fled that day from Saul, went to Achish, the king of Gath. The servants of Achish said to him, is not this David, the king of the land? And did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, David his 10,000. David took these words to heart and was much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath, so he changed his behavior before them and pretended to be insane in their hands and made marks on the door and the gate and let his spittle run down his beard. Then Achish said to his servants, behold, you see the man is mad. Why then have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen that you've brought this fellow to behave as a madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? Okay, so he does this again, and this is a to kind of keep the thing going, right? So he doesn't get killed here, right? And so he pretends to be crazy. I love what the king says, right? Do I not have enough crazy people around me already? I mean, you got to bring me more. We're starting to import them now, right? So anyway, he flees and goes on his way. All right. David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. Everyone who was in distress and everyone who was in debt, everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him, and he became the commander over them, and there were with him about 400 men. David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, please let my father and my mother stay with you until I know what God will do for me. And he left them there with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Then the prophet Gad said to David, do not remain in the stronghold, depart, go into the land of Judah. So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. The cave of Adullam, it seems to be, if I'm remembering right, it's about halfway between Gath and Bethlehem, which is David's hometown. And it's here that apparently the family hears that he's there, and they come to see David as well. He's been in Saul's service for we don't know for sure how long. So they come to see him. His brothers come. His father, Jesse, comes, and his mother. This is the only time I can think of that David's mother is mentioned. Right? But she comes to see him too. We also see the beginning of David's army, and boy, what a bunch. Okay? All right? Listen to their description again. Everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was in bitter in soul. Cream of the crop, right? It doesn't sound like it. I mean, it sounds like some people who have real trouble, and David becomes the commander of them. The old adage, beggars can't be choosers, I guess. I mean, this is who he's got. And so they stay there. He talks with his parents, and then he goes to Moab and leaves his parents there. Maybe not much. It just may be one of those things that we need to remember, that there's a connection between David and Moab. David's, if I'm doing my family tree right in my head, it'd be David's great grandmother is Ruth, the Moabite. So there is some tie there in some way. And we get to see, little things like that, the way God works in all these different things. So he leaves his parents there, and then he goes on. All right, this is where it starts to turn bad. Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men who were with him. Saul was sitting at Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in his hand. All his servants were standing about him. So Saul said to his servants who stood about him, "Hear now, people of Benjamin. Will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you commanders, make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, that you all of you have conspired against me? No one discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as at this day. Then answered Doeg the Edomite, who stood by the servants of Saul, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him and gave him provisions and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Some commentators make something of this, of including in this that as Saul sits under this tree, that he's holding his spear. It's reasonable, I guess, in their thinking, and if they're right, which may or may not be, but I still think it shines a light into the personality of Saul, that the spear of the king is his symbol of power, right? It's kind of his symbol of ruling, and he's holding on to this. And I think we see this with Saul, as he is going to hold on to power, right? This is what he's after. It's interesting the way that he phrases this, and he's like, oh, I'm the victim. Okay, poor me. Look what all I could do for you all, right? That I could make you commanders, I could give you fields and vineyards and do all this stuff, and David, the son of Jesse, can't do any of that. Why is it that you are all against me? And we have this, it's kind of a paranoid fit that he has here. It gets worse. Just warn you, but here it is. That no one has told me that my son has made a covenant with him, that he has stirred up everybody against me. You know, poor me. We brought this out last week, and we're going to bring it out again today. When we start in looking at things that have gone wrong in our lives, in situations in which we find ourselves, and we can do that, right? I'm sure that we can all find those places. Maybe you can't. I can find them. They're usually pretty close. But we can remember those things, and we can start looking and go, look, oh, poor me, right? I don't know why. I don't know why this kind of thing happens to me. But if Saul would remember, like what we talked about last week, Saul's undoing is all because of Saul. And most of the time, in the situations in which we find ourselves, not always, but in bad situations in which we find ourselves, when we want to sit around and go, poor me, if we'll start looking back, we can go, okay, I found out who's to blame. And here I am, right? It's usually some of our own doing that's caused this. So just keep that in mind. All right. So Saul sends for Ahimelech the priest and all of his father's house, all who were at Nob, and all of them came to the king. Saul said, hear now, son of Ahitub. And he answered, here I am, my lord. And Saul said to him, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, that you have given him bread and a sword and inquired of God for him, so that he has risen against me to lie in wait, as at this day? Ahimelech answered the king, and who among all your servants is so faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law and captain over your bodyguard and honored in your house? Is today the first time that I have inquired of God for him? No. Let not the king impute anything to his servant or to all the house of my father, for your servant has known nothing of all this, much or little. David's lie worked. Okay? I mean, to this point, Ahimelech's got going, why would I not? I mean, David's been faithful in your house. He is your son-in-law. I mean, that's easy to forget, as we're reading through this. And he's your son-in-law. Why would I not do this? Why would I not? This isn't the first time I've asked God, about him or for him. Why would I not? It at least works to that point, but then it goes downhill in a hurry. The king said, you shall surely die, you and all your father's house. The king said to the guard who stood around him, turn and kill the priest of the Lord, because their hand also is with David. And they knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me. But the servants of the king would not put out their hand to strike the priest of the Lord. Then the king said to Dog, "You turn and strike the priest." And Dog the Edomite turned and struck down the priest. He killed on that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod. And Nob, the city of the priest, he put to the sword both man and woman, child and infant, ox, donkey, and sheep he put to the sword. One of the sons of Ahimelech, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priest of the Lord. And David said to him, "I knew on that day when Dog the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, 'I have occasioned the death of all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me. Do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me you will be in safekeeping.'" Well, as Saul rants about this and then looks at his servants and says, "Kill the priest," the servants go, "No." Which seems odd. I mean, he is, after all, the king. And I'm certain that he's commanded them to do things before and they've done it, but they say no. And part of that may be chalked up to the fact that they have seen him in this kind of paranoid fit before. And it may be that they're going, I'm not sure you really want to do that. We need people around us that will tell us every once in a while, "I'm not sure you really want to do that." Okay? The problem with Saul is he wouldn't listen to it. And so he turns to the Edomite. Now, as Bible students, we know there's a tension between Edom and Israel that starts way back in Genesis. Back in the womb of their mother. The Edomites are descendants of Esau. And so you have Jacob and Esau, and that struggle continues, and it plays out in various ways throughout the Old Testament. But Dog is one of them. So he kills them. And then they go to Nob and they kill everybody there. I just think I find it ironic, I guess, that Saul seems to have no problem with killing everyone, everything, destroying completely a town full of the priests of God, yet wouldn't do that to Amalek. The reason he lost his kingdom. When God said, "I want you to go against the Amalekites and kill all of them. Man, woman, child, infant, ox, donkey, everything." And he doesn't. But he doesn't have a problem here killing the priests of God and destroying everything there. Maybe it speaks to how far we can go, right? Maybe it speaks to the first step may not look like it's that big a deal, but where it leads gets pretty ugly. We don't know. I have no idea. But as we read about Saul, I doubt seriously, okay? I may be wrong. I doubt seriously that when God said, "Go take care of the Amalekites," and he doesn't do that he saw himself later killing God's priest and destroying the town. But that's kind of the way sin does us. Right? Little things at first until we get to the point where we're almost unrecognizable. A good illustration for this may be when we think about addiction, and maybe we see the results of that, kind of the bottoming out when we see people in addiction, and we see what rock bottom looks like. That I'm just guessing that if we were to ask those people at rock bottom, is this where you saw this going? That none of them would say yes. Right? None of us say that's where we think it's going to end up. Maybe it speaks to the little things, to the little everyday things, the little everyday chances we have to be obedient or not. Right? And as Saul is anointed king over Israel, I doubt seriously that this is where he saw this going. But just a little bit here and a little bit there, and it leads in a way wrong direction. You agree with that? Okay. All right. Oh man, I don't know if we're going to get through this. If I was smarter, I would have titled this what Roger titled it when we were talking in the foyers a little bit ago. He said, "Are you ready for 4 chapters of hide and seek?" Right? Because that's what we got here, right? David in his quest to be the hide and seek champion. Here we go. He now has a priest, Abiathar, who is part of the priestly line, who is now with David. And so, chapter 23. They told David, "Behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are robbing the threshing floors." Therefore David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go and attack these Philistines?" And the Lord said to David, "Go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah." But David's men said to him, "Behold, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines?" And so David inquired of the Lord again, and the Lord answered him, "Arise, go down, for I will give the Philistines into your hand." And David and his men went out to Keilah, fought with the Philistines, brought away their livestock, struck them with a great blow, and David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. Keilah is a border town. It's close to the border of the area of the Philistines, and so you can understand the reluctance a little of the guys who are hiding out with David. And it's bad enough to be here in the middle of here in the heartland, right here where we're really not noticed. But if we get out there, this could really be bad. And so David inquires of the Lord, and we see him do this twice. I think one of those times, and we're not told this, I just think one of those times, I think the first time David inquires of the Lord and the Lord says, "Go ahead." I think the next time is in the presence of the soldiers. That's just a guess. To let them know that this is going to be good. And they go, and they rescue the town. Keilah, being where it is probably used to the Philistines demanding from them. But to rob the threshing floor is a step too far. That threatens survival. And so something has to be done. So David does that and takes the livestock and then saves the city. The city, we're not going to read this next section. We're going to kind of talk through it. But the city is not necessarily all that grateful. Okay? Because what happens next is Saul finds out that this is where David is, and he's going to go up against that city, and he's going to see one of his own cities. Okay, this is how far this gets, and he's going to go attack the city to get David. And so again, David inquires of God and says, "What should we do? If we stay here, will we be safe? Will the people of this city protect us or not?" And he says, "Not. They'll hand you over." So they leave. Saul comes. He's prepared again to destroy a city. Doesn't, because finds out that David's already gone. Let's go to chapter 24 really quickly. We have another battle with the Philistines. Saul pulls off of searching for David and goes and does that. And then this is where we pick up in 24. When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi." And Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all of Israel, went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goats' rocks. And he came to the sheepfolds by the way where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave, and the men of David said to him, "Here is the day of which the Lord has said to you, Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you." And David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Afterwards, David's heart struck him because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. And he said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed." So David persuaded his men with these words and did not permit them to attack Saul. Saul rose up, left the cave, and went on his way. Afterward, David also arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, "My Lord and King." When Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of the men who say, 'Behold, David seeks your harm'? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against the Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you, and may the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancients say, out of the wicked comes wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? After whom do you pursue? A dead dog? After a flea? May the Lord therefore judge and give sentence between me and you, and see to it, and plead my cause and deliver me from your hand. This is one of two where he has the opportunity, and I gotta think for we need to think for just a minute about if we could put ourselves in David's shoes for a minute. I think we see a real struggle, and it's just covered just really, really briefly, but I think we see a real struggle on what to do here. Whether or not to tell Ahimelech, the priest at Nob, of what's really going on is an ethical dilemma. Here's a bigger one. David and his men are hidden, and Saul comes into this cave within reach. And David has people with him going, this is the day, right? This is it. You know, God has given him to you. And David cuts the corner of his robe off, and I think regrets it. I may be wrong, but to lay his hand and to do damage against the one that God has anointed king is not going to happen. And he persuades those with him because they also, I mean, can we be honest? These guys are on the run, and they're hiding from the king and his army, who has 3,000 men out there who would kill them if they step out of this cave. And these guys are just fine, right? These guys in the cave with David are just fine to go, we can put an end to this right now. And David says, no. There's a lot about David that we see. We'll see a lot of his failings. We will, as we make our way through this. But there's something here that really, really ought to grab a hold of us. Is that David has the opportunity, and if we're looking at this, not knowing the story, if we were just looking at this and reading through it, we go, yes, do it. Okay? All right, I'm the only one that would say, yes, do it, right? And David says, no. We talked a little bit earlier about people say things to us and it can be taken the wrong way, or maybe they say things to us and exactly how they meant it, is hurtful. And then the opportunity comes. Huh? And it's just served right out there for us to even the score. I mean, it's right there. Maybe they've said something about us. They've kind of, maybe they've said something to us that's kind of offensive. But then, to our surprise, just like Saul walking into a cave, this information comes to us about them, and it's not flattering. Right? This is the kind of information that could really, really do some damage. And we've got it. It's right here. And then the bell rings. No, and then, so come back next week. No, I'm just kidding. And so it's right there. And I think that I hope we can kind of feel it, right? We can kind of feel the pull and the temptation to go, yes, this will take care of things. And what we see with David is going, no, I won't. And the proverb, which the proverb that he quotes, the proverb of the ancients, he says, that wickedness comes from the wicked. Sounds a little bit like probably something we'd be more familiar with when we get to places like, I believe it's in Romans, where Paul says, and repay no one evil for evil. Right? But man, that's hard, isn't it? But we see it. We really quickly, and we'll pick up some more of this next week because it's going to ring again. I promise you. They don't quit. Is that when David says, "This is how close I was, and this is what I could have done." I don't know why you're listening to people that say, "I want to kill you because I had the opportunity and didn't take it." That it does make a difference in Saul. Now, we're going to find out it's not a lasting one, but it makes a difference. That kind of thing resonates when it's brought to light. And I think it's really probably what it's kind of how it's supposed to work. Is that we think about the call that we have as God's people is to be different from the world around us. I mean, again, just look. I mean, when we think of the world around us, they don't really have much of a problem using the things that they find to damage people, right? Would you agree with that? But it's not supposed to be that way here. We're not supposed to be like that. And whenever that comes to light, that we're not like that, then it does have an effect, and it does draw attention. Let's go ahead and let's just stop there, and then we're going to pick up here. We almost made it through 24, and then we'll move on next week. So let's have a prayer. Father, we love you so much, and we want to be your people. We want to be like you. We want to be obedient and to be found faithful, and you know the struggles that we have with that as we try to be your people and sometimes in places that's not friendly to that. Help us to keep in mind who you are and the people you've called us to be. Help us to understand the fact that your holiness, this idea of you being different and other than we are, is supposed to be reflected in our lives, that we're supposed to be different and other from the way that we engage with the world around us. We're thankful for your faithfulness and your continued love and grace even when we get it wrong. But we pray that in those times that we recognize it and ask for your forgiveness. And we're so thankful for your love and your grace that makes that possible. Thank you for our time together this morning. We love you so much, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen.